Miller here.
Hello.
Good evening.
This is our guest speaker, Scott, by the way.
Hi. Nice to see all of you.
I've never seen his face ever. I've only
Oh,
talked
I just think I've never seen yours either.
to
Funny, I wonder what you're picturing.
Well, you look like your voice. I'll just say that.
Oh, okay, good.
I was able to get the PowerPoint off to Commissioner Miller.
Great.
So, yeah, so she'll be able to follow along.
Okay, that's helpful.
Except I didn't get it, Alice.
You didn't get it? Oh my goodness.
Nope.
Oh my, let me do this again. Did I forget to attach it?
I don't know.
You didn't get it. It's okay. I'm going to text you what I think your email address is. Make sure I got it. Sorry about that.
I'm kind of getting used to not seeing PowerPoint.
Okay. Well, that's not what I want. So we'll, you have your phone right there, right?
Yes, I do.
Oops, that's not. It's going to text you. There we go.
You forgot the CC after Cale Miller.
Oh, okay. I will get that over to you right now. Thank you.
And it's all small case letters.
Okay,
Or,
perfect. Okay, here it comes. Thank you. Commissioner Mosher, I heard that somebody told me that you had an exciting adventure today.
Oh yeah. Today and yesterday, actually, we went on a couple really awesome mountain bike rides.
He has a friend with an e-bike, so
Everybody needs a friend with an e-bike. Actually, Tony has an army of e-bikes. So anybody who wants to go on e-bike rides, let me know. I'll get you in.
So how different is the experience mountain biking with an e-bike versus just a regular mountain bike?
Oh, let me tell you. It takes all the pain out of the ascents and leaves all the pleasure of the descents.
Okay.
Plus, you will be able to reach spots that without the little help from like Steely Horse, I just wouldn't be able to do.
Like I said, I thought it was all about going faster, but I can see it's about getting places.
It's much more about getting places. Yeah, I mean the fast stuff is downhill, in which case you don't need the help.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all about the uphill.
Okay.
And we got some gnarly uphills around here.
Yeah, you do.
Shoo. We went up the Labyrinth Trail today, and there was a lot of hopping off and pushing, even with the e-bikes going on.
Mm.
There's some very technical and steep and rocky stuff going on there, but fun. And some of the most dramatic gorge views you can find anywhere.
All right, are we ready to get this rolling?
looks like
We're
we,
missing Mark, right?
yeah, we have a quorum, so Chair, feel free to get started if that's your wish, and maybe he'll join us in a few minutes.
Okay, that sounds good. Quorum we have, so I'll call this meeting to order. Paula, will you please do the roll call here?
Carly Aparicio, present. Cody Cornett,
Present.
Alan Easling,
Here.
Philip Mosher,
Present.
Linda Miller,
Here,
and Mark Popoff is absent.
Excellent. We'll get going to the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll get started. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Moving on to the approval of the agenda. May I have, as long as everyone's read through the agenda, may I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda as printed.
Okay, anyone care to second that?
Miller seconds.
Excellent, that has been motioned for approval and seconded. Moving on to the approval of minutes. As long
Excuse
as
me, Chair Cornett,
Yes.
you also need a vote.
Oh. Let's move to vote approval of the agenda. All in favor of approving the agenda, raise your right hand and say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Moving on to the approval of the minutes, as long as everyone has reviewed, may I get a motion to approve the minutes from the September 16th, 2021 meeting, please?
I motion to approve the minutes from the September 2021 meeting.
I second.
Miller second.
Excellent. The approval of the minutes has been motioned and seconded. Let's vote to approve the minutes from September 16th, 2021. All in favor of approving those minutes, raise your right hand and say aye.
Aye.
Excellent. If we have any members of the general public who would like to comment during this time on things that are not on the agenda, please take this time to do so. And please limit your comment to 3 to 5 minutes. I don't think there is anyone in the public. So moving on to that, Planning Commissioner training will be taken over by Alice. So Alice, please go ahead.
Chair Cornett, members of the commission, really pleased this evening to have our field representative from the Department of Land Conservation and Development, who is from Central Oregon. He lives in Redmond and operates, I think, out of DLCD's Bend office. Do you have a Bend office? Yeah. And as I was telling Commissioner Miller earlier tonight, that he's a Central Oregon guy, and he has Central Oregon values. I have been really impressed across the board with all the assistance that we've received from all state agencies since I've been here in the Dalles, particularly DLCD, and Scott and his team are responsible for making sure that we had money and received the grant for the housing code amendments. So that was a grant from his agency, and I just really appreciate that grant program and all the help that they give us. And a lot of the help they give us is they let us do our work, and that's a great thing. So they bring on consultants that are well experienced, and they kind of stay out of our way and let us develop our vision at the local level, making sure that it meets state parameters. But I really appreciate that about Scott and the whole state team. So that's all I have. I will turn it over. There is a PowerPoint that he has. He's going to share his screen, and he does have a commitment later tonight, and we're trying to get this wrapped up if possible at like 10 till 7. So I know Scott has said he's willing to stay on longer, but feel free. I think we'd like to wrap it up. I think we all would. So with that, I will hand it over to Scott, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alice. I only have one correction to your introduction. I do live in Central Oregon, but I am an Idaho guy with Idaho values. So that might even be better for a commissioner, I don't know. But I grew up in Nampa, Idaho, and ended up all the way through college. I went to college there, and I was born there and went to college, and then went off to North Carolina for 4 years, where I went to graduate school, had my first internship in planning, and then moved back here where I worked for a Council of Governments. While working for a Council of Governments in Redmond, I was part of the Redmond Planning Commission. So that was really what I considered my actual start. Graduate school is not. Graduate school is a lot of theory. Being on the Planning Commission was all the practical knowledge I gained, which helped me get to my first job with the Redmond Planning Department. So I appreciate what you do on a number of levels, including having been there. And so this type of things, these trainings are one of my favorite things I do. I say that especially when I can do it in person, because there's nothing like being there in person, being able to back and forth. So I apologize in advance. I will do my best to be clear. Feel free to interrupt if I'm going too fast. I'll try not to. There are a lot of slides. The presentation I have is kind of a Frankenstein's monster of like 6 different presentations put together by 6 different people over about 20 years. And so you're going to see a difference in formatting and backgrounds. And no one's ever gone, I've been wanting to put it all together and make it uniform. No one's ever done that. I haven't had time yet. And so that's why you're going to see a lot of different kind of formatting. So I was a planning director in Pine after work in Redmond. I was a planner for Redmond from 2002 to 2004, and then until 2013, the planning director for the city of Prineville. And then I got my job in 2013 as DLCD as a central region representative, covering the central core of the state from Klamath and Lake counties up through Hood River County, Wasco County, and Sherman County. So a really beautiful area of the state. Used to enjoy the traveling until now. I don't. You probably can't tell because it's blurred out. And there's a reason. I'm working from my garage now, so I don't work from the Bend office, at least not till January. So that's my introduction. If you don't mind, Alice told me a little bit about all of you, just kind of give me a general impression. Would you mind, each of you, just letting me know? I see your names, obviously, but how long you've lived in the Dalles, how long you've been on the Planning Commission, and briefly just why you're on the Planning Commission?
Sure, I'll go first. My name's Cody Cornett. I moved to the Dalles in 2016. I lived in Hood River previously to that, moved to the Gorge in 2012, moved to the Dalles in 2016. And I've been on the Planning Commission since 2019, I think. Yeah, 2019, May 2019. And I was actually asked to by the mayor, which was very nice. Someone recommended me. I still don't know who. And yeah, I saw it as my civic duty and responsibility to take on that request. So here I am.
I'll go. Alan Easling, lived in the Dalles since 2013. Let's see, when did I get on the planning commission? A little over a year ago, I think. And like Cody said, the same reason, just wanted to get involved in the community for the most part.
Great. Thank you.
Carly, you want to go?
Sure. Good evening. My name is Carly Aparicio. I have lived in the Dalles for about 5 years now, and this is my first year on the Planning Commission. I don't even think I've hit 6 months at this point. And I joined the Planning Commission similar to my colleagues, but also when we moved, my husband and I moved here, we didn't expect to love the Dalles as much as we have. And I don't think people in this community realize what we have. So I just want to make sure we continue to improve the community so everyone can enjoy it.
Great. Thank you.
Linda?
Okay, so I grew up in the Dalles, and I left in the early 70s, and I was gone for a little over 20 years. And I've lived all over the country, all up and down the West Coast, from San Diego up to Portland, and Midwest and back east. And when my husband, we were in Michigan, when he said, let's go back to the West Coast, I thought he meant Portland or Seattle, not my hometown, the Dalles. But thankfully, it has worked out. It's been wonderful. And I've been back for over 20 years, about actually almost 30 years. And I was on city council. And when I was, after my 8 years on city council, the mayor asked if I would be on the planning commission, and therefore here I am.
Great. It's the opposite of the way it usually goes. Usually planning commissioners use it as a stepping stool to get up to be a counselor. So I appreciate you taking on this role.
My pleasure.
And then there's me, Philip Mosher. I am Swedish originally, grew up in Sweden and Germany, came to the States in my mid-20s, and ended up in Portland for about 20 years before moving out here about 4 years ago. I'm a realtor, and I came here, started my career as a realtor, didn't know a single person, and got engaged with the community on multiple levels, and have really enjoyed that a lot. And then when the mayor asked me to join the planning commission, I thought that that was a real obvious way to contribute to what I care about, which is the community and the town. And it's been great. And I've been on the commission for a bit more than a year, I think.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for taking the time. That really helps me to get to know you just a little bit before I start. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Like I said, I will try to, it's a little harder on a video, making sure okay, let me see. Making sure I'm clear and speak slowly because I don't have quite the same visual feedback. So if I do go too fast, let me know. Let's start the slideshow. Or if I'm not being clear, especially you, Linda, since you're on the phone, I want to make sure that you can hear what I'm saying.
So far, loud and clear.
Okay, great. And then I want to mention, feel free, we can do questions at the end, but also anytime along here, I think it always works best if you can ask the question when it's hot on your mind. So feel free to interrupt and ask a question. And then also, this is stuff I've learned from my years in planning. And it's nothing that Alice doesn't already know. You've got a professional there who knows every bit of this. So Alice, I'd invite you to jump in anytime that you feel like too. So I'll go ahead and get started. I'm not going to read all this to you. You know, that's a picture of Tom McCall. The planning program started in 1973 with Oregon Land Use Act of 1973, Senate Bill 100. That's significant to me because in graduate school, when I was in North Carolina, Oregon is one of the main case studies that we seem to have in every class because of the unique land use program here that was designed to keep what we have as nice as it is, and then the quality of life that we all like. So it's interesting to go from there to end up working for DLCD, and because we'd studied the structure of the organization. Of course, that resulted in Land Conservation and Development Commission and Department of Land Conservation and Development. It's kind of unfortunate always that they have an LCDC and DLCD because that leads to all kinds of confusion. I'll go through first the state responsibilities, state and local responsibilities. And we combine LCDC, which is our commission. That's a body of 7 people appointed by the governor, representing different regions from around the state. And they're included in the slide with DLC because our work overlaps so much. A lot of things that they do, sometimes our director will approve something. Some of the work that they do, sometimes the staff that does it. So something there's very distinct roles, but also does mesh together. So our organization, including the commission, set the statewide land use policy, focus in the statewide land use goals, which I'll get to, and then the implementing rules. It's our responsibility to acknowledge any comprehensive plans. So a site plan that comes through you doesn't ever come to us. We don't see it, for example, or a subdivision. We never see that. We see things that affect your comprehensive plan. So any kind of, we are in charge of acknowledging the initial comprehensive plan. And then anytime you do an update, as small, it could be a tiny update to your sign code, that comes to us if it has to do with the comprehensive plan or any of the implementing ordinances that come from the comprehensive plan. LCDC in particular helps to enforce goals if there's enforcement issues locally. And then we, as I said, we review plan amendments. That's so that anything that affects your plan map or your planning documents comes to us for review. And then we provide technical and financial assistance. Technical assistance is this: it's being available to help with the training, or it's us being able to answer questions. Financial assistance is what Alice referred to with some of our grant programs, which we are able to fortunately fund some of the things that are required or that we'd like to see. Then you have the cities and counties, and if I'm stumbling, it's because I'm moving your faces around. I like to see as many of your faces as I can, but I'm moving around on my screen so I can see. Of course, this is where it really, Alice talked about this, that sometimes the best thing we can do is stay out of the way. The state sets the parameters, and a lot of people look at, including myself before I started working for DLCD, saw Oregon as a very big brother, top-down planning state, where when I was in Prineville, we were so glad to have the city of Bend going through the urban growth boundary expansion because we kind of got away with whatever we wanted to, is what it felt like, because the eye was on Bend. But working for DLCD, I have found, to my surprise, that it's really encourages setting the framework for local decision making as much as possible. It does seem sometimes like it's heavy-handed, but for the most part, it's up to cities and counties to show how they're meeting state goals in ways that, as this says, address their local vision and needs, because every place isn't the same. And of course, cities and counties, you adopt your plans in compliance with those goals. Once those are adopted and acknowledged, they're considered to be compliant, and then you treat it as if that is the law, is often how it is. And courts give a lot of deference to acknowledged comprehensive plans if you're challenged in a court, because that has been acknowledged. And even if there's gray area in the state law, that often can be defined by how you implement your own comprehensive plan. And of course, you enforce your own codes and ordinance and make your land use decisions. These are the statewide land use goals. As you see, I've crossed out the bottom 5, which don't apply to you. And we're going to go through these briefly. So let me move you again. So the titles they give these are kind of funny to me a little bit. The process goals, goal 1, citizen involvement. As I understand, that was for a reason that it was number 1. Oregon values citizens being involved in planning. Your citizens in planning. You are the main citizen, the conduit for citizens to come and talk to the city about planning. You're the connection from both the citizens to the planning department and to the city council. You serve a really important role. You serve the important role for allowing citizen involvement. And then, of course, land use planning goal 2 talks about how land use planning is to be implemented locally in accordance with state laws and goals. Then we have the rural goals, which don't directly involve the city unless you're doing an urban growth boundary expansion, which means they don't ever involve you. Bad joke. because I know that it has been a difficult time ever getting an urban growth boundary expansion, and it doesn't look like it's going to get much better with the situation that the Dalles is in, being in the scenic area. But that's certainly something you look at. You look at agricultural lands and forest lands to avoid, if possible, whenever there's an urban growth boundary expansion. Then we have these called urban goals, and they're in quotes because they're not all urban. Some are rural too. Some are, but they have to do with, as you see, economic development, housing, providing facilities. Since everybody can see these, I think, Linda, you do have that in front of you now, right? The presentation?
No.
Oh, you
no,
don't? Okay.
I don't.
Okay, that affects how I'll do this. I don't want to be reading to anybody. You can just see them. But so the goals that are the urban goals are economic development, housing, provision of public facilities, provision of transportation, and then urbanization, which urbanization is a general, it has to do with urban growth boundaries, has to do with making sure there is compact development where compact development is appropriate and has the appropriate services. And you have all the various elements that make up urban life in the cities so that it doesn't sprawl out into the rural environments that we're trying to protect. And then goal 8 is a little separate because that definitely is rural and urban recreation. Then these other ones, I've never liked this title, calling them constraints. That's a very development-driven term because it also could be seen as some of the areas that we love and why we like to live here. Goal 5 deals with natural resources, scenic and historic areas, and open spaces. It's a constraint because those are places you can't build. Same with goal 6, which protects air, land, and water quality. It constrains development, but also protects our way of life. And then goal 7 has to do with natural hazards. The next table, and this would be hard to explain, Linda, but it kind of just shows the hierarchy of planning in Oregon, where it all comes down, is driven to how local decisions are made. But it all starts with the Oregon Revised Statutes, or the ORSs. Those are laws passed by legislature, and the statewide planning goals. Those are the two overarching focuses. And the administrative rules come from one of those two sources. They either come from legislature passing a law that is then put into place through an administrative rule. The administrative rule or a statewide planning goal could then lead to DLCD as staff or as our commission initiating rulemaking, which then affects those rules. So those rules can be affected by either the legislature or by our commission. Either way, you could kind of see the statewide planning goals and the revised statutes almost as a comp plan, the administrative rules as a zoning ordinance in a way, because the administrative rules are how the bigger picture items are implemented from the state level. So comprehensive plans are all designed to meet the administrative rules, which if they meet the administrative rules, then they're in compliance with the statewide planning goals and the revised statutes. Like I said, once they're acknowledged, they're considered to be compliant. And as long as you're making decisions that are consistent with your comprehensive plan, you're usually safe from appeals or from challenges to your decisions. And of course, those lead to local ordinances on the implementing ordinances, which include your zoning ordinance, your transportation plan, your various infrastructure plans. And then all that contributes to the local decisions that you're making. This is a next slide. It shows a hierarchy structurally of the Planning Commission, where you fit in. And I know a lot of this will be stuff you just know, but I don't think it hurts to start with the basics because there are a few things that can come out from it. First of all, the city council and the city council works for the residents. They're hired by the residents, they're voted in, they work for them, responsible to them. The city manager is directly responsible to the city council, and the planning commissioners are also directly responsible to the city council, not in that they can necessarily tell you how to do your job, but they can direct your work and ask you to focus on certain elements. And of course, they appoint you. The city manager does not have authority over you. You report directly to the city council. You're a citizen body. The city manager is over staff, of course. And I think an important thing is the planning commission is not. As you can see on the diagram, there's a dotted line because there is a connection where you can advise the work, you can inform the work, but ultimately staff is responsible to the city manager. And that's important because sometimes your priorities won't always be able to be their priorities. And that's just important to keep in mind. Planning Commission responsibilities. A lot of you talked about the community, and that's you're there to reflect community values, to look at the state planning goals, the state framework, and to say, well, this is how our values interact with that and how we're going to represent them in the way we implement the state planning goals. You, of course, have the important role of recommending policies to City Council. Just like Alice is your expert there on staff, you're their experts. You're the planning experts for the city of the Dalles. And it's a really important role because you look at things different than City Council. City Council has a whole lot on their plate that they look at. You specifically look at applying the rule of law and planning issues. And so sometimes their decisions go against what you have, your recommendation, because they're looking at it from a different perspective, but you have that important role of informing them. Of course, then visioning and long-range planning, looking how the city's going to grow, making sure that that you're provided for the citizens for the quality of life, with the infrastructure, including parks and recreation opportunities, school sites. You're looking out for the community, for the long-range communities, to make sure that the place you live in now will be just as good a place to live in the future. And then you have this is one that planning commissions don't often know, because I think they often only see themselves as citizens who are there to give their input. But like I said, and the more you're on the commission, you are the experts for the community, and you have a role which you can take on of educating. And some of the most effective planning work I've seen includes an education component where the commissioners are helping to train the public and help them to understand the parameters within which you work and what planning is in Oregon. So you have an important role in that way too, not just of being the conduit for citizens to provide input, but also to provide it back to them so they can understand the planning process in the city and in the state. Relationship with electeds, with your city council. As I kind of mentioned this, it's important to understand the authority and responsibilities, yours versus theirs, and that they won't always align, that they will be looking at political issues that sometimes they have to take your recommendations in as one element of a variety of items. One time when people I've seen cities get into trouble is when council doesn't understand that you are looking at not just opinions and perspectives of what's best for the community, but you as a commission have the important role of making sure that the city's protected and following state law, so that you're not going to spend a lot of money on challenges or get people's hopes up that something's going to happen that is not going to happen because it violates the law. So it's important for council to understand that you're looking at it from a perspective and to respect you as the experts on planning. It's important to make sound recommendations we'll talk a little bit more about the reasoning, backing up your decisions, that it's not just we think this is what's good, but that you look at the facts, you look at the background, the information that comes to you, and can make a decision and link your decision specifically to the information that's been before you. We'll talk a little bit more about that. It's important to, when you can, communicate regularly with the governing body, with the city council. Different cities do it different ways. Sometimes they have joint workshops. I think that's one of the way I like to see it is if you have a project coming up, whether it's a zoning, not a zoning, maybe evaluating your zoning ordinance like you have recently done. I like to start off with the council and commission coming together to kind of get on the same page. That's one way to do it. Another way I've seen is have liaisons. I've had city councilors just have one appointed to sit in on all the planning commission meetings and a planning commissioner to sit on council meetings, just to keep each other informed. There's a lot of ways to do it, but it's important to keep that regular communication so you're not in your own world going about your business without understanding maybe what the council's expectations are, or for them understanding your perspectives. And then don't be afraid to give them your advice. Like I said a couple of times, you're the experts, and they need to hear from you for the good of the community. That is your role, to provide them with planning advice. Our relationship with staff, I mentioned, it's not supervisory. They're a resource for you. It's important that they're a resource back and forth, that there's communication back and forth, and that you have trust with each other, and that they're providing good information, that you trust that information they're giving you. It doesn't mean that you agree. What their role is to provide the framework for you to make an informed decision. So it's their role to give you all the information. They may or may not give a recommendation. Sometimes the staff will simply say, here's the information. We don't have an opinion. Sometimes they'll give a recommendation of approval or denial. And I think an important part is for any planner really is to keep ego out of the way, because it won't always go our direction. It's not personal. So I think it's important to make sure there's atmosphere of respect between staff and the planning commission, understanding each other's roles. And the staff will often have competing priorities. Like I said, their direction comes from city council, not from the commission, although some cities do have a work plan that gets approved to the council, which goes through the commission, which can direct the staff's work. But on a day-to-day basis, usually that work is directed more by what's going on at the city not necessarily what's on the planning commission's plate. I talked about you being a
Bob?
conduit. Yeah,
Yeah, this is Linda. And having been a city councilor and now on the planning commission, residents will go to city councilors. They don't know who to go to on the planning commission. And so they're hitting the councilors up. And there's more communication with constituents with the councilors than there is the planning commission.
that's a good point. And I think that is really typical that that is who they elected. That's who they know. Most, if you talk to a common citizen, I think everyone's going to know who the mayor is. I think most will know who the city councilors are. I think very few maybe percentage-wise are going to know who most of the planning commissioners are. So that's a really good point. And that's maybe another reason for council and commission to make sure they have a good relationship so that they can then be referred to make sure they're giving their input in the right place. So thank you for that. And then, of course, relationship with the public. The golden rule is everything else falls under the guidelines of be fair. And that includes being transparent, being open, following open meeting laws so that people can see, even if they disagree with it, everybody who's involved can see the process that went into it. They have the same information, that there's no question about the developer has information, for example, that the public didn't get to see, or that there was communications that went back and forth, that everything's out in the open. It's important to do your homework. And that is not just, having your packets and reading through them. I found when I was a planner, I valued a whole variety of people. We had one guy on my commission who his big thing was checking punctuation and grammar, and he'd fix everything. And I valued that. It helped me get better. But the last thing I wanted was 7 commissioners looking at my grammar. I wanted 1, and that was great. We had another one who was with a trucking company, and he saw it as his role to represent that, because Prineville, with Les Schwab and with other elements, has major trucking issues. And so he really focused on that, and he would come prepared and do his homework based on that perspective. So your backgrounds are really important, and not everybody is the same thing. Not everybody's going to read the information as thoroughly as others, but everybody's going to bring something to the table. And it's important to know what you have to bring to the table and to do so. Quasi-judicial hearings, we're going to talk about those. And so I'll just skip over that because it's important to follow the right procedures. Respect is important, especially in this day and age where you see public meetings getting out of control often. But you set the tone with how you respect each other, staff, people who come before you. It's really important to keep on topic and to make sure that others do as well, so that because once you lose control of the room, I'm sure some of you have experienced that, it's hard to get it back. Once you let one person go off topic, the people are going to start responding to things that aren't necessarily on topic. And so setting parameters as a commission, especially as the chair, is a really important thing to do, to let people know, here's what's on the table, and maybe define what isn't, that there are not other elements that you can necessarily bring into it. Because the public often doesn't understand that, especially with something like a conditional use permit. They don't understand that there are sometimes pretty significant restrictions as to what can be conditioned, and they have to be tied to the information before you. And then last thing I mentioned, a delicate balance between thoroughness and efficiency. We all want to be efficient. We all want to, if someone's before us trying to do something that is good for the community, start a business, whatever, to get them through the process as quick as possible. Or if they're getting denial, get that answer as quick as possible. But there's also, you want to make sure you're thorough and answer questions. So it's always important to weigh as a commission. If you need more time, it's important to take that time to maybe have a second hearing, even if you know that there's someone in front of you who's saying, we got to get this moving. And maybe you take that into account, that, okay, there's no opposition. We have some questions, but we feel like we can go forward comfortably with certain conditions. So that's a balance. That's one of the toughest things I know you often have to deal with, specifically in more contentious decisions. I want to go ahead. Is there a question? I'll try to pause this a little more often so that you don't have to break in. The comprehensive plan is here's one of the formatting changes that we jump into. I didn't realize that it would come one at a time. So the comp plan is your overarching document. It guides, it gives a vision and the overall perspective on where the city wants to go with development, including conservation of resources, how you're going to provide for housing needs of your community, your economic development goals. It includes a couple aspects, which I know the city's worked on recently, the housing needs analysis. I think some of you, I'm sure, worked on it, that was adopted just a few years ago, is one part of the comprehensive plan. It's your housing element of your comprehensive plan that then guides other elements. The general public doesn't know a lot about the comprehensive plan. They might know, have heard of it, might know what it is, but most of the public doesn't know very much about what's in it, unless they've been involved specifically in the creation of it. The components, there's usually 3 basic components: the factual base, all the information you gather about your demographics, your economic trends, all the things that will be built into what makes up your community now and what you expect it to look like in the future. Then goals and policies. Looking at that, you look at the trends, the factual basis, and you say, what of this do we want to preserve, and what do we want to change? And then the goals and policies are what you utilize to set the course for those on a high level, the goals, and then on a little more specific level, the policies, how you're going to implement those goals. And then, of course, you've got your maps, your zoning and comprehensive plan map, which I consider the map and this next part, which is the zoning and development code. As a planner, I always consider this the contract with the community. This is when somebody bought a house, invested in a business or maybe in an apartment complex. This is their contract that they know they can depend on because they can see it and they understand it. The comprehensive plan isn't, like I said, isn't something most citizens know. This is what a citizen will come to see what they can do, and almost as importantly, what their neighbor can or can't do, so they know what to expect. So I think it's a really important document. It's an important one to make sure that there's a lot of transparency in how it's developed. And one thing that is often overlooked is making sure that any changes are consistent with your comprehensive plan. Often cities will make zoning ordinance changes or maybe just setbacks, for example. I know the Dalles a couple of years ago, before this recent zoning ordinance, had a difference in setbacks. The comprehensive plan had certain setbacks, and some zones had been changed to not comply with that. So it's always important to check back and make sure it's complying with the comprehensive plan. And if it's not, ask yourself why. What are we proposing that isn't in compliance with what we wanted? And then maybe that'll make you think, okay, well, maybe it isn't something we should do, or maybe it would be, it's time we need to change the comprehensive plan because we had not thought of this situation. So consistency with the comprehensive plan and developed zoning ordinance are really important. Also, because if your zoning ordinance isn't consistent and someone challenges you on a decision, the courts will look at the comprehensive plan. And if the zoning ordinance is not consistent, the comprehensive plan will overrule the zoning ordinance. So it has specific regulations. It's much more specific than the comprehensive plan. You're very familiar with this. This is something you use all the time, so I won't go into all the details that it says here about it. I think you pretty much, you're familiar with the code. It's what guides development, tells people what they can't do and what standards they have to meet. And as I mentioned, I see it as a contract with the community. Types of land use decisions. We're going to talk about 2 different types: legislative and quasi-judicial. Legislative are I'm going to put all these up so you can just see them. They're broader perspective changes. They're almost like changing a law at the state level, where they're meant to be looking at not a specific property, but a broad category of properties. It might be the whole city. It might be a specific zone, like the industrial zone. It's not about specific properties. It's something like changing zoning ordinance amendments, as the example put there. It could be setbacks in the industrial zone. It could be height limits. It could be a use that's allowed or not allowed. But it's something that is broad and applies to all properties. It's, like I said, a large geographical area, usually many ownerships. This is important because it distinguishes it from a lot of these things will distinguish it from the quasi-judicial, which we'll talk next. No decisions required. When you looked at updating your zoning ordinance, you didn't have to. You could start the process, look at it, and decide in the end, we're not going to. We're going to leave it like it is. No decisions required on it. It's in a legislative. You are the recommending body. You review it, give a recommendation to council. Council adopts it. And then the role of the commission is like a legislator. You're making a law. You are reviewing to see what's best for the community. There are a lot fewer procedural. There's a lot fewer procedurals with it than with quasi-judicial. And a really important thing is that you can pull in, your role is to pull in as much information as you can from as many sources. So you still have to be careful of conflicts of interest. There's 2 realtors on here. That's kind of the classic example of potential conflict of interest. You could potentially benefit from things that are said. And so it's important to keep those in mind. But there's no ex parte contact, which we'll get into. you can talk to as many people as you want, and you don't have to do it in a public forum. You just have to bring your ideas and then to inform the process. Then to quasi-judicial, which is a different type. This is more when you have a specific property and a small group, either an individual owner or a small group of owners. You are sitting as it says, judicial in a judiciary facility, almost as a judge. You're looking only at information before you that's presented, that everybody involved in the case, in the application, including the applicant, including all citizens who are involved, the public, see the exact same information and know exactly the information you're using. So nothing outside of that process. So it's kind of like a judge. You know, if a lawyer fails to bring something before him, the judge isn't going to say, well, I know this, and so I'm going to make the decision based on that. They can't. They have to make it based on some form. That's what you're sitting as when you're doing a quasi-judicial land use decision. So this is something that's like an individual zone change on a property. This is like a site plan review. It's for a specific application, and it does require a decision. You have to approve or deny it. You have a 120-day window to do so. So it's not like legislative where you don't necessarily have to make a decision. And an opportunity for hearing is required, even if it's an outright decision, or you might have a type 1 where it's conditional use, but it's by staff. If somebody demands a hearing, they have the right to it. So if staff gives a denial, the applicant has a right to say, no, I want my hearing. And there's a limit on the fee. I think it's $250 limit. It might be a little higher now. So you can't charge the full amount for an appeal, but you get to have your hearing, at least one. And as I said, I think the key is that all parties know the same information. Also, ex parte contacts have to be announced, and that comes back to everyone knowing the same thing. If you've talked to somebody around town, you got some information from them that the other commissioners don't know, or the public or the applicant don't know. It's important to reveal that so that everybody can be going by the same information.
I want to just be clear. I want to make sure that the commission understands what he just said, that you can talk to people. You just have to disclose it. So that's that. Sometimes I've had that with commissioners over the years who say, I can't talk to you. That's not the case. Although it's good to avoid things where there might be an appearance of a conflict of interest. And so a lot of commissioners will avoid conversations, but you don't have to, you just have to disclose it. So it's good to try to stay as clean as you can so you appear impartial, but I just wanted to make that point. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for adding that. That's exactly right. I think the recommendation, best practice is always, if you can, get the people to come and talk before everybody. So it's their words, not yours, not you trying to repeat theirs. But if they talk, you can't stop someone from talking to you, and you can't just plug your ears and run away. So if someone does, then definitely, as long as you, and we'll get to ex parte contacts reporting on those, but thank you, Alice. And then of course there's ministerial actions. This is otherwise called over-the-counter reviews. These are ones where there's clear criteria, no discretion involved. It's a sign permit. It's reviewing a building permit to make sure they're meeting the setbacks, that type of thing that is just done over the counter. And that doesn't usually involve the planning commission. Other than maybe determining what is appropriate to be a ministerial action. There can be some things that you might determine either are considered that you need to review, or vice versa, that it's wasting our time. We're proving all these. This is really clear criteria. There's no reason for us to be reviewing this. Legislative decision, the hearings process. The important thing with this, again, is information gathering. So it's about getting people there, getting people involved, and pulling as much information from the public as you can. And making it clear, the education component I talked about, helping that people understand what the parameters are of what you're asking for, so they're not spending a lot of time coming up with ideas that just are not appropriate to what you're specifically looking at. You don't necessarily in quasi-judicial have to say, okay, now we're going to have the proponents for this talk and the opponents. But that's often the way they do it. In the legislative, there's really no opponents or proponents. People are just there to give their opinion, give their ideas. Of course, when you come to a hearing, someone might be just against the whole thing and be opposing it, but there's not really usually a separation. Most people have comments to give. They don't necessarily aren't opposing or in favor of or against an entire legislative process, maybe certain elements of it. And then if can, again, as Alice and I talked about, no concerns ex parte conduct at all, or bias even, which we'll get into what that is. But a conflict of interest is still something that should be identified and declared and just be kept in mind. Quasi-judicial review is a little more detailed usually. It involves a pre-application process usually. Usually it might be informal with someone just coming to the counter talking about what they want to do with staff. It might be a formal where several staff comes in and meets with the development. That usually doesn't involve the planning commission and shouldn't. That's information that until it's actually submitted to you isn't something that you should be reviewing. Then staff reviews for completeness. This is an important part, and I talked about the relationship with staff and planning commission, that they don't necessarily need to, you don't have to agree with them, but it's important the staff is providing you the information that you need. And that's what the completeness review is for, to make sure that you don't get to a hearing and say, well, what about X, Y, and Z? We need no information on this. And so it could hold up the whole hearings process, could potentially lead to a conflict with the 120-day clock, for example, because if it's something the city's asking for, if completeness was, if the city said, yeah, your application is complete, and then the commission comes back and asks for more information, the clock keeps running, the 120-day clock. If it's something that you're ready to give a denial, but the applicant says, I want to give more information to try to not get a denial, then you can ask the applicant to stop the clock and the 120 days clock stops. But that's something to keep in mind, that completeness is important because that clock doesn't start until it's been deemed complete. And sometimes the completeness review will determine that staff will say, we need these additional information, this up the applicant to provide that. Then
I just want to say something, and we're past it now, so I can say it. In my humble opinion, I wasn't on staff at the time, but I thought on the legacy decision, there was a lot for staff to keep track of on that application. It was quite contentious and it got appealed, not at the staff level, then it went to planning commission, appealed at city council. When you're in a situation where you have decisions that are going to get appealed like that, it's really important to stay on top of that clock. And I have a big spreadsheet that I've used in other places that I've designed. I haven't quite designed it and calibrated it yet for the Dalles because we do pretty well with our timing. But I would say on that legacy development, we weren't as careful as we should have been about the 120-day. Fortunately, we had a developer who was willing to give us an extension to the 120-day. Had he not, we may have been in a world of hurt. So it's just one of those things that at the staff level, we have to pay attention to. And as we are all working to be expeditious with our decisions, we have to pay attention to it too. So that's something you may hear about in the future. In the Dalles, generally, we do a good job with processing things in a timely way. So I just wanted to bring that up.
No, that's good. That can be a real art to managing that clock. And it's
What
important.
would happen if you did not stay within that 120-day limit?
So I'll ask Scott to answer that one.
Maybe applicant, I think maybe there might be, I'm going to skip this slide on notice because that's all staff. That's not, doesn't have to do with you. This presentation is actually for planners as well, who are new planners. Okay, it's not, I thought it was going to be the next slide. So the applicant can file, I believe it's called, I'm not good with legal terms, I think it's called a writ of mandamus.
Mm-hmm.
What that is it goes to a judge who then makes a decision and can either order the city to make a decision within a certain time or simply approve the development with or without conditions that you want. And so it takes it out of your hands potentially and puts it in the judge's hands and say, okay, the city's failed to make the decision. Therefore, I'm going to make the decision. And unless it's just really obviously something you shouldn't approve, most likely they're going to approve it, and it may not be with the same conditions you want.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, I don't know what your experience is, Alice, but I've only ran up against that a couple of times, and I haven't had anybody actually take it that far. They've always worked with us a little bit longer to get it done, because they do have to initiate that for something to happen. It's not like automatically it's approved. It still has to go to a judge.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and so the other thing I want to say, there's really an important role for a chair in all this, setting the tone for the meetings, making sure the information is there. But one thing to always check, if you get an applicant or a citizen requesting a continuation, so you're not making a decision how you're going to continue it, always look at staff, I recommend, and say, how are we doing on the clock? Do we need to ask the applicant to hold the time? If it's the applicant requesting it, if it's the citizens, it's more of, okay, we need to see if we really can, or if we need to move forward with the decision because we don't have time. So it's always good to check with staff before agreeing to continue or voting to continue a hearing.
Question, sorry, quick question. So, if we're doing a meeting and a citizen, let's say a citizen asks for more time, they can't make that request, right? The applicant has to make the request for more time.
A citizen can request, they could say, we got here, these issues came up. We feel like that this additional information needs to be done. We need to be more prepared and go look at these issues we hadn't thought about. And you can make the decision, yeah, you will continue this hearing for 2 weeks to a date certain. We'll say what's your next meeting date, and that'll give them time to provide the information. Or you could, and they can request that you don't have to honor it. But what I was getting at is if it's the citizen requests it, or if it's you as a commission who chooses to do it, not the applicant requesting it, the time clock doesn't stop, it keeps going. Whereas if the applicant requests it, you can tell them that you only continue it if they do what's called toll the time, which means the time clock stops on whatever day it is and won't start again until the next hearing.
Okay.
One thing to do if that comes up in the future, it's really important for the chair to recognize that he or she has a role in saying, we're going to call a recess so that the staff and the city attorney can confer with one another about it. So that's usually a good idea. So we have a little bit of time to huddle and look at the clock and look at the information we have, and then give you our recommendation. And I will probably pipe up at that point anyway, but just remember you have the ability to pause and look to us to help you answer those questions and requests.
Okay.
So this next, I'm going to go through procedure, and a lot of this, I'm sure, is what you already do. But I'll go through it because there are some things that we don't always keep in mind when we're doing the hearings. But this is for a quasi-judicial decision. One of those that involves a small number or a single property, single owner, or a few owners, and is one that you have to make a decision on, and you're looking at the facts before you. So the quasi-judicial. So the chair always opens up. Often it's nice to have a written statement. Do you have an opening statement that is read at these, Alice?
Yes, we do. We have yes.
Great, that's always helpful. Where you describe the proceedings and the rules of conduct. You lay out how it's going to go and how it's expected, including, I think one's important, I don't think it's in this slide, but I found this one of the most important things, that all testimony is always directed to the commission, never to staff, never especially to the public, because often you'll get people up there and the point of the applicant say, he's trying to do this or she's trying to do that, or they'll get into it. And it's so really important to keep the tone of the meeting where they're always addressing the commission, and it comes through you, not directly at each other. So that's something I think is really important to keep in mind, and a really important role of the chair to make sure that happens.
I guess I want to say something about that. Some of you have noticed that I tend to be a little formal in the way I talk to you in hearings, in meetings. I call you by commissioner, and and you can always call me Alice, I don't care. But the reason I do that is, one, I like the formality because it brings with it respect, and you deserve respect because you were appointed by the council and by the mayor to be in the role you're in, and it's an important role. So that's important to me. Secondly, in doing so, you kind of impart that there is decorum and we're going to be polite to one another. And then the other thing that I do, and again, it was pounded into me by a mentor at a previous city, is that a lot of times when I'm answering a question, maybe Commissioner Aparicio will ask me a question. When I answer, I will often say Chair Cornett and Councilor Aparicio, or I'll say Chair Cornett and the commission. And I'll do that because really the question, member of the public, what I'm trying to do is set a tone, is that the member of the public needs to address the question to the chair. The chair then directs who should be answering it. That's really the way it should go. Sometimes it doesn't need that much formality, but if you get into a contentious hearing, you're really going to want to keep your order and make sure the chair is going to need to be able to stay in control of what's going on in that situation. So that's kind of why I'm formal. It's been pounded into me, but also I think it leads to more people being a little bit more polite in the public, not so much you, but but in public. So anyway, that's all.
Yeah, 100%. That's great, Alice. The staff also sets the tone. I think that's really important. And another important distinction between staff and the commission, staff, it's not the role of staff as much as, you're volunteers. And so I know, having been one, I often would look at staff when I was a new commissioner thinking, this is getting out of control. Why aren't you doing something, staff? As I became, it's not staff's role to keep it in control. It's the chair's role to make sure that everything is in order, because staff is to be called on by the chair, not to speak out or to run the meeting. So that's just something very important to the chair. It's a significant role that a lot of people don't quite understand and have a hard time with, because you're volunteers. It's not an easy thing to do always. In the opening statement, there should be a raise it or waive it statement. That's a law that came into effect a few years ago to avoid the situation where someone's maybe participating against a project and it doesn't go their way, and the city approves something, for example, and they're mad. So they come back and they appeal it to LUBA, and they appeal it based on the things they said in the hearing. Then they also throw in a whole bunch of other stuff they came up with that they didn't say. So the raise or waive it statement is important, because if you don't actually say it in a local public meeting, you don't get to say it when you go to the state level for an appeal. So I think that's an important thing that people need to know, that you have to say it here, either in writing or verbally, orally, or else it can't come up later. We talked about the right to continuance. There is a right for the applicant can always request a continuance to a hearing, and it has to be granted. It doesn't just have to be, they might request a continuance to get additional information, and it might be to a date certain, like we talked about, or they might request, I need time to put together. I heard a lot of comments from the neighbors at this meeting. I need to respond, and so I need time to put the document together. We don't need to have another meeting, but I need to put that together. In which case you continue, leave the record open, not just to continue the hearing, but leave the record open so they can provide additional information for your next hearing. And then there wouldn't be additional testimony at the next hearing, but written information can come in both from the applicant and then from the public in response prior to your hearing.
And really well seasoned land use attorneys know how to play that continuance game really well. And I don't even know the parts of the law, but they'll ask for a continuance, and then they'll have to keep the record open for 7 days. And then if you're not on top of it as a staff member with your city attorney, you can really burn up a lot of the clock if you're not careful. So you have to really watch that. And so the chair and all of you need to be aware that some of it is to protect people's rights, but some of it is just flat out gamesmanship, womanship, whatever it is. It's just it's a game, and it's there's an art behind it. So and then I was going to say something else that relates to that. Well, I'll remember another time, and I'll bring it up in a few minutes, I guess.
Jump in anytime. I love that you are. It makes it so much nicer for me. Then, of course, the opening needs to include declaration of ex parte contacts, where you ask anybody on the commission if you had an ex parte contact or if you have bias or conflict of interest to state, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Then it always goes to the staff report, where they give their proposal, sometimes a recommendation, sometimes not. Sometimes it's the findings with that evaluates all the criteria, that's an important role of staff to make sure that all the relevant criteria is addressed in the written staff report. Usually they don't go through all that criteria in front of you, because most of it's just not relevant. A lot of it's kind of given, but that's where they highlight the important issues that might come up. Then of course there's testimony. The applicant always starts off, and then often different cities do it different ways. Some will simply then say, okay, who would like to, they'll have a list who people signed up ahead of time. They'll follow that, and it may be proponents or opponents. The advantage of that is some people think you don't get a us versus them mentality, where the proponents are all saying something, the opponents come through, where it's more mixed. It also gives people who are more neutral, maybe have a question or aren't against it, but have a concern to fit. Because often I've been in meetings where people say, well, I'm not a proponent or opponent. I don't know where to fit. So they then come up. So one way is to just have a written record where people sign up. The other is to have it in order, where you often have the applicant, then support of the applicant. Sometimes you'll have state agencies speak, or other agencies, then opponents, feel neutral, then and feel neutral. And then this is important. It always has to end with the applicant's rebuttal. Whatever has been said, it always comes back to the applicant. And that includes times, there's situations I've seen a lot where the commission will close the hearing. And then somebody will stand up from the discussion coming on. You'll hear someone from the audience say, hey, I want to say something. And commission doesn't have to allow it, and sometimes shouldn't allow it, but there are times that they do. And so that they will choose to reopen the public hearing. Or maybe among yourselves, you'll have a question. You'll say, well, we got, this person said something that I want to find out more about. So you reopen the hearing and have that person come up. If you do that, you then always have to let the applicant come have the rebuttal. They have to have the last word, and nothing can be said that's against their application or affects their application without them having to have the last word on it. So that's important to remember through the process. Of course, request for continuance, I mentioned that. Closing the hearing, the chair closes the public hearing, and then that's when the decision can be made. There can be some initial discussion, not deliberation. There's discussion can be more of how do we want to proceed with this, not necessarily looking at the merits of it. Until you look at the merits, you really need to have a motion on the table. So someone needs to make a motion in a second, and then you can discuss that motion in the details you want. There's a real temptation at that point sometimes to bring other people in. Staff you can bring in. You can ask staff to talk, but the public or the applicant, you can't without reopening the public hearing. And then, of course, after deliberation, you can then take a vote. After the hearing, and this is important, if often the staff, the commission will just go with the staff recommendation, which often will have a recommendation of approval with conditions, and you might just go with those exact conditions. I'd say more often than not, there's something that's tweaked. If you tweak something, like you add a condition, it's really important that you tie that condition to an actual finding. Often you'll see planning commissions say, oh, we think they need to have a landscape buffer against this side because there's a whole bunch of houses over there. And so, okay, we'll put a landscape buffer in as a requirement. If you don't tie it to a condition, that is highly subject to an appeal. So you have to look, staff would have to do a little bit of work to help you tie either in the meeting or more likely after the meeting, tie it to the condition. And some different councils do it different ways. Sometimes they'll have it mailed out to them and they'll have just kind of a, yes, that meets what we want, the chair can sign it. Or sometimes you can bring it back to the next meeting, have a time where the chair will sign the decision after everyone's had a chance to review it to make sure that the changes made by staff to the findings to support the condition are what they intended. The staff can't change a condition. It's got to be what you said because you're voting on the decision with the conditions. But it is important that within that meeting, and I kind of stated that wrong, so I'm going to take a step back. It's not up to staff to go back and find out how to make it work for you. In the meeting, you need to state, here's why we're making this decision and what it's being tied to. So then staff is simply changing what you've already said. So that's important. It's not up to staff to go back and justify your conditions that you put on it. Any questions on that?
Well, I just wanted to reinforce something there. I have had a lot of experience in my career of maybe 2 or 3 hearings in a night. And sometimes you get to the 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock hour and you're all really tired and you just want to go home. But somebody on the commission needs to change a condition or something comes up. And it's really tempting to want to wrap it all up that night and make the decision. But what he just said is awfully important, is that a lot of cities don't do what we do. And that is that we have, not only do we do 2 things. We approve we have a public hearing where a decision gets made, and then we follow it up with the resolution. So in a case where you were to tweak something, we would probably put a pause on doing the resolution until the next meeting, because what we would need to do on your behalf, either at the meeting or maybe after the meeting, would be to change the findings, just like he said. Make sure that whatever you changed is supported by the findings. And then what the resolution allows us to do is to come back and get your blessing on that. And we need to make sure that we have enough time in the clock to allow for that. So it's not as easy, but it's awfully important you do that. If something gets appealed and you don't have good findings, it can get reversed by the LUBA. So it's important. Anyway, that's all.
Alice, that was you mentioned the clock. That was my question. When does the clock stop? Is it when it's the decision, when we vote, when it's decision? For us, is it the resolution? When is the end of the 120 days?
It is after the appeal period is up for whoever the final decision is with. So if If it's your decision, it would be, I think we have a 10-day appeal period to city council. So when we have, for instance, if you make a decision, we approve a resolution, we have I forget in this city, I think we have 5 days by code, 2 or 5 days by code to get a notice of decision out. Once the notice of decision gets out, the actual piece of paper that's signed by everybody gets out, then there's a 10-day appeal period from there. And if no one appeals to city council, that's the end right there. If it does get appealed, then we keep going until the appeal period is up for the city council.
But for us, it can't move forward until it's gone to the resolution. So
Yes, yes. And in our code, this is the first city I've worked in that requires a resolution with your decisions. I don't know if Scott's ever been in a city that requires resolutions at city council or a planning commission, but it's new for me, but I tried to get to not do it. It's in our code. So we have to do it unless we change our code.
So I guess it's Halloween coming up. That's what's going on with my screen. Like I said, work out of my garage. And it's not a big deal in the daytime when I'm normally working that we have an electrical issue where the light goes out. But apparently at night it's an issue. So that's what just happened. My light in my garage went out. So it should come back on in a little bit. I'm going to try to speed up just a little bit. I'm okay going past 7. I want to respect your time though. And I know you can only absorb so much. So I'll try to speed up and skip things that maybe aren't quite as relevant. I do want to talk about findings just a little bit more, the relevant facts. And the key again is that each approval criteria, not just the decision itself, but each criterion is satisfied by the facts, and facts are, and then of course how the conditions, any condition decision relate to it. And that's important not just for appeals, but as local planners and as a state, we're often asked to dig up something from 10, 15 years ago, where someone wants to research. And if you pull up a staff report that isn't complete, doesn't really address all the criteria, you don't know why those decisions were made the way they were. So it's a really important record to have. And then also, it's also important for you as a commission to logically sort through your decision, to have the facts before you and not just based on emotion. I think one of the hardest things as a commissioner to me was always not just going with who's in the room, because you're not representing who's in the room, you're representing the general public. And often the general public isn't going to show up if they support something, because they're under the assumption it's going forward. Why, we don't need to come. It's the people who are opposed to it are going to come. So it's often hard to filter out that, okay, it's just because that's the loudest voices that we're hearing doesn't mean it's the right decision. So having good findings and basing it on the data is really important for helping you to get a good perspective and make your decision. We kind of talked about this, identifying all the applicable criteria, address each one separately, state the facts. Sometimes there's inconsistent evidence where you might have two different, the proponents and opponents might be looking at the same issue, but have a different perspective on it. And you have to weigh, there's gray area. That's why you're there. You're not there to look at criteria that doesn't have discretion. You're here to have that discretion. So when there's conflicting evidence, you have to look at the evidence and determine what you think best fits with the situation and the code, your comp plan, and then justify that with findings. That's when findings are really important, is if you have to deal with those gray area and make a determination, a judgment call. And again, as I said, as long as you are basing on your comprehensive plan and your ordinances, courts will generally give a lot of deference to LUBA, in the Land Use Board of Appeals, will give a lot of deference to the local decision, as long as you follow the right procedures like that and base your decision on your own plans. Common problems with findings, failure to address each one. It is important, as tedious as it gets, and it is tedious for staff to go through, and the findings, it's really tempting to take a big block of them and say, all these are met. You really got to do them one by one, just to make sure you're not missing something and you're covering your bases. Deferring necessary findings to a condition of approval. That's what I talked about. If you make a condition of approval and you try to put your finding in it, that's the condition is not where you make your justification. The findings are where you make your justification for your ultimate conditions. The conditions should be very clean. There should be nothing but the decision, and then specifically what needs to be done. No justification for it, because the justification is back in the findings. generalization, making a conclusion without sufficient facts. We talked about that pretty well. And then the causal relationship between facts and conclusions. That's what findings are for, to say we're making this decision because of this. I'm going to skip the record because that's really for staff to know for if there's an appeal. Burden of proof. This is as it says, it's a burden, and it's on whose burden it is. If it's an application, the burden is on the applicant to demonstrate that they meet the code. It's not on the citizens, the opponents, to say they don't meet it. It's the applicant needs to demonstrate that they meet it. So they basically do what staff does. They should have to go through and look at each of the criteria and demonstrate how their proposal proves that it meets the criteria. We covered complete applications. This is one that is often ignored too. People will raise issues in a public hearing, and if the commission doesn't necessarily agree with them, they will just go on, okay, thanks for talking. They'll close the hearing and they'll make their decision without actually addressing the issues raised. The applicant needs to be asked to address those issues, even if the commissioners all say, we totally disagree, we think it's silly what this person's brought up. They still need to come back up, have their rebuttal, and give their response, because that needs to be part of the decision. So there shouldn't be anything that's left on the table that someone goes away and say, well, I spoke, but they didn't address it. I've had City of Bend, they've got a lot of staff, a lot of resources, so they can do this kind of thing. But I know when they did the urban growth boundary, they kept a detailed list. And at the end of the meeting, I was impressed. It took a took a couple hours, but the chair went through one by one to make sure each of the people who commented had been addressed in some way with the process. And that was a legislative process, so it was different, but I found that interesting that they were that detailed to make sure that they covered each of them. And then again, so this is another thing that can come up. We talked about the importance of the applicant having the rebuttal, the last word. It's also important that when you have the applicant speak, then the public and the applicant gets a final rebuttal, that they don't bring up new information. If they bring up something new that wasn't in the application, wasn't in the materials, and wasn't in their initial presentation, the public has the right to then comment on that. So it's important and then they get to rebut it again. So it's just important as a commission that you're aware, okay, they said something that wasn't brought up before. We need to open it up again to see if there's comments from the public. And staff can help with that and point out, this is an issue. Now, sometimes you can tell by the body language, or sometimes things shouted from the audience, which really should be discouraged, but sometimes obviously you can't avoid it. I had a hard time seeing my keyboard. That's why I have to keep leaning forward. We kind of talked about continuance. I'm going to go ahead and skip this. It's very wordy. Talked about the raise it or waive it standard. Impartial tribune, that's what you're supposed to be. Like I said, you are supposed to be like a judge, where there's nothing that you're bringing from the outside. Obviously, you're human. There's stuff you're going to bring from the outside. You can't help it. But to the best possible, everything that you base your decision on should be only what's in front of you and what everybody else involved in the decision can see. Kind of move this a little bit. Okay, and members of the, so we're going to talk about ex parte contact, conflicts of interest and bias, because that's something that can be raised either by another commissioner or by the public, that this person should not be making a decision and deliberating on this issue because of one of these issues. So I want to talk about ex parte contacts. That's contact by a commissioner on a circumstance which don't involve all parties in the proceedings. So if you're doing a site visit, and primarily we do this sometimes, we did do a site visit where we'd have the commission go on one, but we wanted to avoid ex parte contacts, so we would invite the public. We'd provide transportation if necessary. The public could come on the site visit. When we got back to the meeting room, we would then summarize. We have a note taker to summarize everything that was talked about there. So that was not an ex parte contact. If you go to a site yourself and you're looking around because you want to do a site visit, you're trying to do your diligence and see what's out there, which is okay to do. And I know it's some attorneys don't encourage it. Other planners say, no, do it. Go see what you're looking at. But the important thing is to bring it back with you, what you learned. So if you talk to somebody, now, a lot of people will say, I had an ex parte contact that I have to declare. I spoke with so-and-so. Okay, they're good to go. That's not good. You need to say, I spoke with them. Here's what we talked about. Here's conclusions. Everything you say, try to give a full picture of what you heard. Same with visual. If you did a site visit, give a clear understanding of what you saw that maybe is not being presented in the room, so that everybody in the room, decision makers and other participants, know what you're basing your decision on and can comment on it as well. It could be a written, it could be an email you get from somebody. It could be reading a newspaper, an editorial in the newspaper. That could be an ex parte contact if it could potentially affect your decision making and needed to be, and if you can, give that to your staff who can then distribute it if possible ahead of the meeting. They should be, generally ex parte communication should be discouraged. Like Al said, it's not illegal, you can do it. But if possible, it's best to everybody hears the same thing from the source, not from another person. Okay, so ex parte contact does not mean that you can't help make the decision. You just need to declare it and make sure that it's on the table for everybody to know. So if one does happen, we kind of talked about this already, it's important to disclose it, put on the record, describe the substance of the contact, and be sure that it's noted in the record. And then there should be an opportunity to I'm sorry, I'm having to move you guys around so that I can see all this. Okay, so there should, I believe what this last one means, it's a little worded funny, but I think there should be an opportunity for other commissioners to then comment on it as well, and to make sure that they're comfortable with the contact, that it was sufficiently portrayed. Site visits, you can do site visits, that's fine. That is another source of ex parte contact. Again, it just has to have disclosure. So it says, try to do it as early as possible. Don't wait for deliberations. It needs to be out there before anyone from the public speaks, before the applicant speaks, right at the beginning of the meetings, as soon as possible. Make sure that everybody knows what your ex parte contact is. And that's up to the chair and in your statement to bring up. There are times when people don't think of it. They kind of forget, and then it's like, oh, middle of the meeting, I forgot. As soon as you remember, bring it up. That's the time to do it, just as soon as you possibly can. I want to talk a little bit about potential conflict.
Sorry, quick
Yes.
question. Is it okay for like me as a chair to say, in a circumstance where there is a physical site, which I guess there always is it okay for me to say, hey, has anyone had an ex parte contact? Has anyone visited this site physically? And that way we can just get it out in the open.
Yeah, that should be stated in ex parte contact, but if you're just trying to make it really clear so people understand that is part of it, yeah, there's no problem with you saying that. That's not a bad idea. Anything to make it clear to the public and to other commissioners, I think is always a good. So a potential versus an actual conflict of interest. And this is a classic, the two realtors on here, this is a classic conflict here. A potential conflict of interest, and conflict of interest always has to do, and people are confused about this sometimes, has to do with financial benefit. It's not, I'm on the board of a nonprofit and I really believe in this cause. And so that's not a conflict of interest because you don't have a financial benefit. If you're on a board and you could potentially benefit financially from it, or if you have a business that could be a conflict of interest. So potential conflict of interest is any decision that a person acting in your capacity could potentially have a financial or pecuniary benefit to not just you, but to your closest relatives. Or member of your household, or a business that you have ownership interest in, or one of those people has ownership interest in. If it's a potential one, you must declare it, but you can still participate as long as you can state honestly that it will not affect your decision. A realtor, again, I said that's a classic example because development might take place that you might end up being the realtor of record for, but you don't know that for sure. It hasn't been decided. And so that's a potential. It's not an actual conflict of interest. There might be a zone change that could, it might be an individual site zone change that you could benefit from if you are either could potentially represent a property in the same block or within that site. That's a potential because you're not the realtor of record yet. If you are the realtor of record and you would benefit directly from this, then yeah, you have what's called an actual conflict of interest, which we'll get to next, which means you would potentially benefit or lose financially from the results of the decision. So if you have potential, you need to publicly announce it at the beginning of the meeting prior to, ideally, it says prior to debating and voting. Really, you need to announce it prior so that it's known up front from the beginning so the public knows that you've declared this potential conflict of interest. And again, you do it when the chair calls for it. I think we've covered all the rest. And there's no problem with continuing as long as you make the statement, here's a potential conflict of interest, but it will not affect my decision making. I can still look at this objectively. And so here's the actual conflict of interest when the effect of a decision would financially affect one of the commissioners or one of your close relatives. In this case, you must declare it, and by law, you must step down. And this is something that I learned from an attorney recently, that I always thought that you could say, I'm going to step down, but I'm going to go out in the audience. I'm going to come up and speak when it's time for opponents. I found from an attorney that that's somewhat gray area, but the current legal opinion is that you do not get to do that. As a commissioner, you're part of the overall decision-making process and potentially could have undue influence on your peers on the commission. And therefore, the legal advice that I've received is not to do that. I did not hear when I talked to those attorneys that presented that there's actually a clear cut, yeah, you'll lose a case, but that is the legal advice that I've heard so far. Your own attorney might be one who should look into that, but that's just the recommendations I've received. So the main thing is, if you have an actual conflict, do you have something to say, Alice?
Oh, I'll let you finish and then I'll talk.
Okay. An actual conflict, the main thing is you don't get to participate anymore. You need to step down.
I was just going to add that if you are, and I know Commissioner Easling did this a meeting or two ago, that if you think you might have a conflict of interest or you have something that you think you might want to say during this part of the meeting, feel free to call us ahead of time and we can give you advice on what to do and what to say. I have had a number of times in my career where a member of the planning commission or a city council member called and asked for us to write a statement for them to say, and just so that it was legally correct and they were following the right advice from our attorneys. So we can do that for you. Jonathan and I can help you with that, and so can staff.
Okay, thank you. That's a good point. I think we're getting close to the end, so I'll try to get through. We talked about publicly. You refrain not just from voting, but from being part of it. You really need to physically remove yourself from at least from the front of the room. Some people recommend that you actually leave the room entirely and wait until it's over and then come back in and participate in the next aspect of the meeting. This is one that was new to me when I first started doing this presentation, but if there is a person necessary to meet the minimum number of votes, there can be an exception. But as you see, it says the exception is limited to be eligible to vote, but not to participate as a public official in any discussion or debate on the issue out of which the actual conflict arises. So you could potentially discuss elements of it, but if there is any element that has to do with your conflict of interest, you cannot participate in. The best case is, honestly, I would recommend if you can't have a quorum without having that person there, to continue the hearing so that that's not an issue. Because it really could put the city, I think, at risk if you've declared an actual conflict and still vote, even if you don't participate in the hearing. So I think that's best practice would be, if you can, to just continue the hearing. Actually, no, there's in Redmond, when I was on the commission, I remember one time when I was so opposed to something, I had this great idea that I was just going to march out of there and make it so we didn't have a quorum. And the attorney showed me how smart I was by pointing out right in the meeting that, no, if you leave, the quorum starts at the beginning of the meeting, and the bylaw specifically said, if a quorum is established at the beginning of the meeting, it's considered a quorum for the entire meeting. So my great protest was going to be a failure. Personal bias. Now this is different. This is important because this is not the financial aspect only. This could be anything that could potentially cloud your judgment or affect your judgment. This is where if you're on a nonprofit for a home building agency, a Habitat for Humanity, and there's one before you, you could have a personal bias. So you have to declare your biases as well. You could have, it could affect your judgment based on acquaintance or relationship. It could be, I know the applicant, that's a bias. It's not going to benefit you financially. It might be your best friend putting in for an application. Or she might be applying for a variance or something that you, or conditional use that you just have to say they have a bias. So in that case, you don't have to step down necessarily, but you do need to be able to say that your bias won't affect your decision. And there are times it would. it was my best friend, it would. I would not want to be in the situation of having to make a decision if that had to do with somebody who was close to me. I think that's all I have. So, here we go. When a bias, if one does exist, you need to disclose the nature so everyone understands the nature of it. Specifically, so like I am on the board of this, or I know this person because of this way, and then state whether or not their opinion would disqualify them. So it doesn't, as I said, it doesn't necessarily disqualify you, but if you don't think you can be fair and impartial, it's important that you do step down, and that can be challenged. Someone could raise questions about that if they really question, like, and your conduct shows a lot. If you're not challenging the person the way you would, or asking the questions you would, or overlooking things, and it becomes obvious that you're being overly friendly with it. You're not treating this person the same way as you would a regular applicant. I think so. I think conduct can often, the perception can be important to the public. Oh, good. I wasn't sure if that was the end of it, and we're pretty close to the time. So that's all that I had for tonight. I'd be glad to answer any questions or have any more discussion that you might have.
I guess back to the conflict of interest. What if, like, I myself were applying for a variance? I would need to be in the meeting, right?
Yeah, in that case, you would come in as the applicant. You wouldn't be. I think you could be part of the meeting, and that'd be the one exception to you're not stepping down to oppose or support an application. It's your own application, so at that point you could. Yeah, it's not like you couldn't come and represent yourself. So that's a different type of situation. It's a good question, though.
Okay.
But I don't think it means you have to not be a part of the rest of the meeting. That doesn't have anything to do with your application.
Yeah, okay.
We had the worst, I'll just tell you this because it was so crazy. A small town, about 400 people in Southern Oregon. The chair of the commission, who was also their volunteer planner and was also on their city council, asked me to come down and talk him through this process. So I gave him a miniature version of this presentation, including conflict of interest, including procedures. And then I went to the meeting that night to see if I could help out. He opened the meeting, and I had the applicant give the staff give the report, which he was the staff. He gave the staff report where he recommended denial as staff. He then opened it for the applicant who spoke. Then he opened it to people to speak, and he was the first person to speak in opposition. He got down, spoke in opposition, went back up to his spot as the chair, ended up voting it down, and then again voted it to support that recommendation of denial at the city council level. So that was the biggest procedural error I've ever witnessed in my life. And the funniest thing to me was he knew going in. I talked to him in detail, but I think he liked his version, his way of doing things better.
I do not personally have any further questions. If anyone else does, please ask now. That was a great presentation. I loved it. That was real informative. And yeah, it actually went pretty quickly because it was full of knowledge. That was great.
Awesome. Well, it's a real privilege. And I love doing this. It's one of my favorite things to do, to work with planning commissioners. You have such an important role. And if you have follow-up, feel free to, you can contact me directly, but I always prefer, when possible, go through Alice, because that way she can tell if she needs to disperse information to other commissioners as well. If you have follow-up questions that we could talk about, glad to do that as well. And then keep in mind, we do things called planner network meetings. We try to get to every region once a year, or it might be every 2 years, but I don't know when the next one is for this region. I don't think it's planned yet, but there's another opportunity to learn specific topics. There's also usually a planning commissioner training to get a refresher on some of this stuff.
Perfect. Well, thanks a bunch, Scott.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we need the help. Most of us are still pretty young and fresh into this planning commission experience. So any help is
great. Thank you for all the time you're giving. Just often a thankless job.
Well, I want to thank you. Often there are commissioner trainings that are available at a time that's convenient to to the trainer, I really appreciated that Scott came to a time that's convenient for us. He came to one of our meetings, so I really appreciate that. And thank you for making time tonight with your family.
No problem. And thank you for all your help, Alice.
Thank you. See ya.
Good night.
What do we have? We have some other things on the agenda. Chair, I'd be happy to move into project updates if you'd like.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I wanted to let you know that we are about to start an exciting project for the city, and that is that the city council at their retreat, their goal-setting retreat that they have every year in January, they set a priority of having an update to our city community vision. We update that about once a year, and the last update was 2011, so it's time. We are about to kick off that project. We will have two things coming up. You will all receive this email, but I also would like to get word out to as many of your friends and well, and as many people as possible about two opportunities. One, we are going to have a kickoff, an in-person kickoff event at the Senior Center. This will all be in an email. You don't have to write it down. On November, it'll be November 15th at 5:30 till about 7. It'll be an open house style kickoff event for our community's vision project. It is COVID time, so this is not absolutely essential for you to come in person. The biggest part that we are going to be promoting at this in-person event is the project, but more importantly will be the first part of this opportunity for involvement, and that will be an online survey. So we're going to be promoting this online survey. So you will, in your email boxes, be receiving a save the date for both opportunities. One, we're going to have the in-person event on November 15th, Monday, 5:30 to 7 at the Senior Center, open house style, so you can come and go in a short amount of time. You don't have to stay for the whole thing. And the other piece is that we will have the survey open from November 1st through the 30th. So that'll give you a full month to complete the survey. This first survey is really a very light survey. It's not asking a lot of heavy questions, and it isn't that long actually, but it's really asking broad brush questions about your vision for the community and ideas you have for the city council, or for the vision to be included in the vision. So I encourage you to, if you can think of people that you would like to get to receive this email, and we have about 500 email addresses that Paula and I have been working really hard on the last few days. If you have email addresses that you'd like to forward my way, I would love to get folks on this project email list. But you will be on it. All of you are already included. So that's one thing, and I really encourage your involvement in this project. We will have a second community survey in January or February. The idea is to have this vision completed by February, March time period, and it's really important to the city council that this be completed prior to the arrival of our new city manager in May, June time period. So that's what we're working on. Any questions about that? Okay, all right. We will have a meeting on the 18th. We are scheduled to have actually, let me ask first Paula, if Paula can chime in on this. Paula just sent me a draft agenda for your meeting on the 4th. And I wanted to ask Paula, do we have any public hearings that we're anticipating on that date?
No.
Okay, so I think we will cancel that meeting. So unless you hear otherwise, we're going to plan to cancel that first meeting, as we have done over the last several months. So we will meet again on the 18th. We will have a hearing, and this one will be a legislative hearing on the transitional housing code. Well, I'm calling it the shelter. I called it the shelter housing code at the last meeting, and that's what we're calling it. So we had a work session or discussion item on that in September at the September meeting, and I've taken all of your comments and incorporated those into this draft. So we'll welcome your action on that item, and then it'll go to City Council for their consideration in December. So that's one where you're making a recommendation to the City Council. And if I get my act together, and it's if Jonathan and I get our acts together, we will provide you the legislative update on all the laws that were passed by the legislature in this session that impact your work. So I have a good summary of that. I just need to pull it all together with Jonathan and we can do a presentation. So it's my hope to have that done. We have been a little bit short-staffed, and I don't say this to play the violin and make you feel sorry for us. That isn't the intent at all, but we've had some short staffing situation over the last couple of months, and particularly last week. We were down a few staff members, and it just led to me making some mistakes. I had to put out the packet. Paula had a well-deserved week off, and I had to put out a couple of packets for meetings. I made a mistake on the one for urban renewal. I don't think I made a mistake on yours, but thank goodness for that. But anyway, it just goes to show you how important it is that we have Paula around, and how important it is to have a full staff. So that's why when I say I may not be able to get my act together, I'm still kind of treading water a little bit with our workload. So with that, those are two items that we're going to be moving forward, and I definitely encourage your involvement with the community vision. So happy to answer any questions you have, and other than that, I can turn it over to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Do any commissioners have any comments, questions, things to say, anything like that?
Just a quick question. I know at some point we were talking about transitioning to in-person meetings. I just didn't know where we were at with that discussion.
I don't know, and I will find out. I imagine we're going to talk about it at our department head meeting next week. The room that needed to be what's the word? We were waiting for our council chambers to be remodeled, and that's done now. And then I think the concern after that has been just the COVID numbers are still a little high in this county, and trying to be careful. So I think it'll be a decision. We'll follow suit with the city council and what they do and what our city manager and city council decide to do. So do you all have a preference at this point?
I mean, I think it would be nice, but at the same time, I think it's also nice to be safe. So I'd prioritize that, but I'm looking forward to having in-person meetings again for sure.
You're going to be impressed with the new chambers that you get to sit in. They look it looks great.
Oh yeah, no more heavy wall paneling or oak.
No.
Okay.
No, it looks great. You'll approve. It looks modern.
Well, I'll
there you go. Look.
Oh, there you go. There it is.
She's showing you right now. Yeah, nice light paint on the walls, and yeah, it looks good.
Nice. Well, I'll just say, in light of transitioning and reopening, getting back together, and all that stuff, this is kind of more just a town vibe thing that we're all a part of course. So with urban renewal and things, you can definitely feel. The Dalles is definitely on the up and up, and kind of really coming into, just a new era. Before COVID hit, we really had some really good momentum downtown and stuff like that. And then obviously COVID happened, so we had to take a little bit of a pause. But if you go downtown now, you can kind of start feeling that energy and the people coming back and stuff, and that's really cool. And I'm really happy that we're all, we as a community are all getting back on the horse and getting back in the right direction. It takes a lot of time after COVID and big pauses like that to do that. So I'm excited just for what our community people are doing with their spaces downtown and businesses and people getting out. It's good. We're making it happen.
It's been
that
great.
Really showed.
Oh, go ahead.
Excuse me. That really showed Friday night at the Neon Sign Museum and the Wall Dog presentation. I was bowled over with the number of people that were there.
Yeah, it's starting to happen, which is awesome.
Yeah, we had over 200 people show up for that. We were very happy with it.
Nice.
And then I heard on Saturday night, Quiet Riot was in town playing at the Granada, the old 80s band. And there was quite a nice turnout for that. And Quiet Riot was walking the streets of the Dalles. That's pretty cool. But there's just a lot of energy. It's been fun for me to watch the transformation of the recreation building and what that's bringing. There's some energy downtown that I didn't see, obviously a year ago with COVID. But I know of 2 developers. I spoke to one this afternoon that 2 developers that want to have housing projects under construction in the next year, and it'll bring new units to our downtown, which is really exciting. And I'm just jazzed about it. So I know you will be too, as things progress here. But I'll be meeting with these folks. Met with one today, meet with another tomorrow, and then we'll have a second meeting with the one I met with today next week. So it's all exciting. It's moving. It feels good.
It does. Anything else for anyone to add or anything like that? Excellent. Well, if it's okay, I'll adjourn the meeting and we'll regroup November 18th, 2021. And a fine day it'll be.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.